research is an example of that, of the number of kids that did the act and were still alive, and those that weren't and had journaled indicated that if someone had just asked them, hey, are you pissed off at everybody? Are you thinking of hurting something? They would have told. They would have said, yeah, I am. I'm that angry that I'm actually thinking of doing this. And of course, now, they're in jail trying to get out. But the journaling of the deceased school shooters indicated the same thing, most of them, that if they just had a connection in the school, an adult to talk to, that there was a high likelihood that they would not have followed through.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Season 2 of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast. I am Miyanovich, and I will be your pilot on an unprecedented ride through the most innovative and forward-thinking analysis of the relationship between humans and guns on planet Earth. The entire nexus between guns and public safety needs a wake-up call, and Liberal Gun Owners is here to rock that party. Are you somebody who thinks you know what's going on with guns and public safety? I don't give a shit. I'm dragging your ass into the future whether you like it or not.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast. 'Tis Miyanovich, and it is good to have you back. The Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast is happy to welcome back my friend and mentor, school safety risk management expert and school psychologist, John Van Dreal. John's bio straight from his LinkedIn profile. John offers over 35 years of experience in education, 28 of those in Salem-Keizer Public Schools. Through that work, he has considerable institutional knowledge and a systems expertise that includes the interrelationships of behavioral threat assessment, suicide risk assessment and prevention, school discipline, special education, 504 law, administration and management, human resources, education culture, mental health, educational psychology, sexual misconduct, and extremely disruptive student behavioral issues. John is the principal author and architect of the Salem-Keizer Cascade Model, a threat assessment system that is institutional within school districts throughout the Pacific Northwest, as well as other regions, and a system that is considered a gold standard by the FBI and the U.S. Department of Education. As such, John remains the primary resource on the fidelity, sustainability, and continued improvement of that model as it evolves within the changing culture of education. For more information, see John's website at www.vandrealconsulting.com. In this series, we will be discussing his new book, Youth Violence Prevention, The Pathway Back Through Inclusion and Connection, as well as discussing many other intriguing topics. So please join me for this multiple-part series with John Van Dreal.
So I want to say to you, the official John Van Dreal, welcome to the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, man. It is great to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your friendship, your mentorship. Amazing. It's one of the gifts and highlights of me being involved with Liberal Gun Owners was the day that we discussed earlier what the glue might be between us. But the day that I got in contact with you and you were like, yeah, dude. Let's have a dialogue.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you.
Right. You came out and visited Willamette University on a beautiful fall day.
I did. And I need to come out again.
Yeah.
That was great. I loved it. So you came out with a book and it came out last year, if I recall correctly. Is this correct?
Yeah. March? No. It might have made it in 2022. Actually, I don't remember if it was in 23 that it got out or in 22.
I think it was 22 because I started talking to you about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Like mid-year. So it's called Youth Violence Prevention, The Pathway Back Through Inclusion and Connection. And it was written by you, John Van Dreal, your wife, Colleen Van Dreal, and your longtime colleague, Courtney McCarthy.
Yes.
So what drove the need for the second book is the first thing that I want to ask you. You have a book that's pretty famous I would say it's pretty famous in the student threat assessment
Yeah,
world.
in that niche, yeah, absolutely. And that book is very prescriptive. The first book, which is in its second edition, we're actually putting together a third edition, is Assessing Student Threats, Implementing the Salem-Kaiser Cascade Model. That is a how-to book. And within that book, in addition to how-to, with K-12 threat assessment, there are chapters on implementing higher ed, BTA programs, adult community threat assessment, teaching SROs how to do threat assessment. There's a chapter on suicide prevention, some mental health stuff, but it's all very technical. And I think it was a very helpful book for a lot of school districts around the country to launch from. In fact, a funny story here is that I hear all the time from places that will email me and let me know they are using this program, but they've never been trained, and they've used that book to implement it. And so that's why I can never give a figure for the number of school districts using this. I can give a figure for the number of districts I've trained, well over 1,000, but the actual number of districts using it, no idea. I'll go to Montana to do a keynote, and I'll ask how many people do BTA, violence prevention. All the hands go up. How many of you are using a system? Hands go up. How many of you are using my system? 3/4 of the hands go up. And I'm kind of like,
Nice.
hey, you could invite me to come here and train you. I like Montana. Please.
Yes, I also like money.
I like money, Montana, and fly fishing. So how about we do some business? And the Montanans are like, nah, we got this. We're Montana people. We do it on our own, you know. And but the second book has 3 chapters on how to, and the remainder of the book are case studies. So the magic of this book, and the reason to answer your question for writing it, was to give people practice doing actual threat assessments. So the book introduces 8 kids, quirky kids who are in trouble, from everything ranging from very serious intention to hurt or kill others to benign mouthiness, where kids just run their mouth and get in trouble. And then the remaining chapters walk each of those kids through each of the questions, concluding with a threat assessment, a level of risk, and the appropriate intervention strategies. So the book really illustrates this kind of continuum of what happens in a K-12 environment, as some kids will say the darndest things and get everybody upset, shut the school down, go into lockdown, and what they're doing is they're angry or goofing off. Is it okay for them to do that? No, but they have brains that are not fully, completely wired, and they are going to do this kind of stuff. So we really like this system in that it examines what's real, and then it very clearly illuminates where your concerns should be and where they should not be. So it's very protective of those quirky kids that can run their mouth and get in trouble. At the same time, it addresses and captures the information necessary to identify the kids that are moving forward with a plan to harm or kill others. So it does what it's supposed to there, and it also helps us stay away from being highly reactionary in an environment and a time when saying gun in a school is the equivalent of saying bomb in an airplane. And we all know those are just words. But because of the harm and the fear and the tragedies, they're heavy, heavy words. And they're magnified just by the times that we live in. So that book was written so that schools can really walk through and get a feel for it. And concludes with, each chapter concludes with a little test to make sure people are getting what it is we're trying to teach them, and comprehending some of these important concepts of prevention and do no harm.
When you guys were running the system early, maybe like first 10 years, and you're getting feedback from some of these districts where you're traveling and doing training, are there a lot of instances where, because there isn't nuance at that time, maybe as much nuance, people are hearing these mouthy kids just spouting off and people overreacting and dropping the hammer and doing all kinds of extreme things? Did those things happen a lot?
Absolutely. They happen all the time. They still happen. And those occurrences inspired me to really tighten the system up to address the kids that are, straight up just benign. They're saying stuff, but they're not behaving in any way, shape, or form that would indicate that they're planning or plotting any kind of murderous situation. They're these are adolescents that they're impulsive, they're dramatic, they're histrionic, and this stuff happens. And I was seeing that a lot. I was seeing it in our own district. Early versions of this were used by people who were not trained well to find ways to expel kids. And so, of course, we immediately addressed that. We had that addressed by 2002, within 2 years, because that absolutely isn't the goal of this. We want to keep these kids close to us, build relationships so we can, first of all, connect with them. That's our job. We care for the kids, but also know what they're up to, read their eyes. What kind of mood are they in? Are they angry at us? And if we keep them close, they'll tell us. There's so many of these cases. Safe School Initiative research is an example of that, of the number of kids that did the act and were still alive, and those that weren't and had journaled indicated that if someone had just asked them, hey, are you pissed off at everybody? Are you thinking of hurting something? They would have told. They would have said, yeah, I am. I'm that angry that I'm actually thinking of doing this. And of course, now, they're in jail trying to get out. But the journaling of the deceased school shooters indicated the same thing, most of them, that if they just had a connection in the school, an adult to talk to, that there was a high likelihood that they would not have followed through.
Yeah.
And that, Randy, is not rocket science. Like that is, that is a 99, not even a 100 level college course in prevention.
And also, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It seems to me to indicate that in many of these instances, these kids are looking for a connection because they're not getting that at home. Does that often happen? It might not be that their parents are terrible or terribly negligent, but there's some kind of connection that's missing. And if anyone would have just stepped in, do you see that a lot?
Pro-social adult in the environment, the institution. So where parents, we want parents to have good relationships with their kids, but we also know that kids are on a roller coaster ride with their parents. There's a point at which we all, if we look back, really kind of despised our parents somewhere along the way. Maybe it was just for 2 months. Maybe it was a couple of years, but it's part of the developmental process that the young adult starts to kind of, it become agitated by the very sound of mom's voice. And that's how we get out of the nest. And that's developmentally appropriate. So we would never rely on just that relationship. And that's why the research is very solid. And in my training and Courtney's training, we're very clear that if you can't do much in the way of intervention, do this one thing. One, pro-social adult in the institution, beyond the parents, custodian, office manager, lunchroom attendant, teacher, instructional assistant, SRO, whoever you've got, whoever can connect, get that relationship built.
So is there a lot of, let me go here. So, I've been working with Eddie Davenport, and Eddie's been placed in charge of a student threat assessment system, behavioral threat assessment system in a certain district in North Carolina. And I've been assisting. And so I've been exposed to some of the dynamics and conversations with Eddie. One of the things that is shocking to me is how easy it is for these kids now to say, I'm going to fucking blow up the school. Like, it happens in a small district a lot, like relative to my opinion, it would be a lot. That means if we extrapolate, that's happening all over the country, like in districts all over the country. And so what I wanted to hear from you on, you addressed it already, but there's this new age that we're in, the desensitization. Perhaps it's relative to the internet and social issues and social media and so on and so forth. But this seems to be potentially worse of a level of desensitization than maybe before the internet. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is the internet age making the desensitization worse?
Intuitively, I say yes to that. But I think it goes all the way back. Well, there is pretty solid research just on television itself and the introduction of television, just television. I'm talking I Love Lucy, not violent TV. The introduction of television and the increase in crime, and especially assault. A couple of pretty good studies, I think, done in Canada with indigenous groups that shared very similar genetics and culture, but were far enough apart to where one group received the television 10 years ahead of the other. And just following the data in the 70s and 80s told us that just that passive form of entertainment took people out of conversations and carrying interactions with their family over the dinner table. I always use the example that it actually pulled people out of the bars at night and brought them home. They would just watch TV. Now, why were the bars important? Well, sometimes your friends are the ones that help control your behavior. And if you are acting out and you go down to the bar and you hang out with your buddies and they say, John, you got to knock that off, man. You got to be nicer. You can't yell at your kids. You can't blah, blah, blah. That has an impact on you. Those are people telling you that. When you're just watching TV, you're drinking beer, and you get angry, you're less likely to have those external locus of control restraints to help. Now, we fast forward to moves like light years past televisions, and we have these phones. And so intuitively, I would say that same occurrence is happening. I think there may be some data on that, just the desensitization to violence, not necessarily now that you're more prone to it. So, for example, first-person shooter games, as far as I know, there's no link to increased violent behavior, some to increased aggression. And the reason I differentiate is violence is violent aggression. It means someone's going to get killed or severely hurt. Aggression is a continuum that ranges from kicking someone in the shins, and scratching their arm to murdering them with a bomb. And at the up end of that continuum is violent aggression. I don't know of any research that shows that first-person shooter games are increasing violent aggression. What I do know, though, is that there is some desensitization to violence in some part because of the graphic nature of the games. Now, back in the day, we watched movies with violence in them, but there was a void between us and that violence. It was movie violence. It was kind of pretend. It didn't start to become, graphic gore violence until the last 20 years. Although one of my favorite films is The Wild Bunch. And that was rated X, I believe, because it was so violent. But it was all this bright neon paint,
Right.
But it was a pretty gratuitously, graphically violent movie. Sam Peckinpah did that in the late 60s or 70s. I think the phone just brings so damn much of it. 24, you're marinating in it if you want to.
Yeah.
You can watch beheadings. You can literally, it doesn't take a lot of work. You can watch people dying or being killed. You can get into gore sites and watch this kind of stuff. And kids do it. The kids I worked with when I was in the district, that's how I found out about that stuff. I actually didn't learn about it at a conference. I just had some kid on gore.com or something. I can't remember watching. I can't even remember all the stuff this kid was watching. And then more and more kids, especially when the beheadings were vogue, the kids were watching those like crazy. And and then it went to other kinds of things, shootings, and then eventually the Christchurch shooting, which was broadcast. You can watch that. You could watch that anyway.
And we add into this the dopaminergic loops, like the perseveration. We have an issue with certain humans not being able to get themselves out of loops.
Yeah.
And those humans, maybe there's a case that they like to find themselves in the digital reality more potentially, and they get stuck and they legitimately just can't get themselves out of it. It just continues to feed back.
I think that's absolutely accurate. Some more than others. So there are those that are more vulnerable by far. Their wiring is set up in a way where they're more vulnerable to those kinds of addictive or kind of repetition obsessive processes, and others that are able to to like parachute in for a while and go, I'm out. And they tend to be people, I think they used to use terms like addictive personalities, things like that. I think it's more complex than that, but they do tend to be people that will easily latch on to substance abuse or get closer than others. Some people can smoke for 2 weeks, not get addicted, drink off and on it, and never have the same level of need and desire for it. I'm sure you've met people that took their first drink and that it was it. They were alcoholics at that point. They were gone. They were out and drugging and drinking from that point on, and it ruined it, and it ruins their life, ruins their interactions and relationships. So I wonder a little bit about the brain mechanics that go with that kind of a brain and then is easily or susceptible to these kinds of instant dopamine hits, highly arousing video, and some of these people are what are called low arousal. So they need more to engage them anyway. That's why they don't do well in a classroom. It's hard for a teacher to compete with that.
Yeah. And also it's interesting to me how the desensitization works with the need for attention or the peacocking in a high schooler or a teenager.
Oh, sure.
So you want to do the thing that gets everybody's attention, and you're desensitized to school shootings because of a number of variables, number of factors. And so it's nothing to you to use that language to get more attention from people.
Sure. And it does. It's a great button pusher. And again, these are brains that are actually hardwired to seek attention and push buttons. And they haven't found the restraint and the self-control that happens as the brain stops developing and we turn into adults and we realize, well, that was kind of impulsive and stupid. I won't do that again. At 16, you think, you're living every day as an eternity, and you're all 4 seasons in a day. But we have to accept that that's the way those brains work. And that's one of the things I train on is, hey, they're just doing their job. They're supposed to be annoying, boundary pushing, impulsive kids who say, fuck you in class, and they think they're going to be okay. And it's disrespectful. And there was by God, a time when kids didn't talk like that. They sure did. They just didn't say it boldly to you as often. They were still talking like that behind your back.
Absolutely.
But they're hardwired to do that. And so we have to work within those parameters and understand it. I mean, think about it. Every civilization since we've been Homo sapiens have used our male teenagers, to do their dirty bidding, to march to age 12, especially right up about until age 24. You have a brain that will march into gunfire, like on command. The girls' brains don't quite do that the same way as the boys. The testosterone and the fact that Mother Nature doesn't honestly give a shit about the males, only one of us, but definitely cares very deeply for the females of the species because it's so important to moving it forward. And the fact that these boys are just wired that way to a certain extent is something we have to recognize. And then we have to contextually look at what they say and do and understand it within that context and still be able to identify those risk factors that tell us, okay, this kid's not just peacocking. He's actually doing research on weapons and trying to collect them. And he has a blueprint of the school and he figured out what times, the bell schedules open the doors. Okay, that's scary, scary stuff right there. He's not just peacocking.
You just led us into a place that I'm dealing with in my research on the human-weapon relationship and deep anthropology.
Yeah, I like that stuff, by the way.
So evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology. So I definitely want to ask you this question because I'm going to ask Dr. Curtis Marion this question in a couple of weeks when I have him on. So the first thing is, you just brought this up, but I'll add to it. So we're on the planet. 90% of the time we're on the planet, we're hunter-gatherers. Like we're living, especially males, 27 years old. That's about it.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have a successful mating and you're going to get as many children out as you possibly can, you have a certain window of time to do it. You're also involved in critical stuff in nature, fighting, hunting, fucking is really what it is. Like that's the 3 things that you're going to do other things. It's not like we're mindless animals.
I call it the 3 Fs.
Yes, right. Yeah. But that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so that means that we have certain wiring. If we're going, I don't know if you know about the word of of Jaak Panskep, Panskepian affective neuroscience. He was known as the rat tickler because he used to learn about rat emotions. This is a really sophomoric way to put it, but he learned about human emotions and the human brain through rats, through play. But he basically brings up that we have evolutionary layering in the brain. We have 3 basic layers. The first layer is going to be that principal primal layer, and it's going to be affects. It's going to be emotion. And from the genome into the brain, that stimulus has to come through there. It has to come through that layer to do the other things. So we have this reality, the deep reality inside the brain. I'm getting to something as a question. My question is, why are humans in the modern world that we seem to have a firewall against acknowledging that we're basically fucking animals, or we are animals? We have anthropodenial so badly. We don't want to acknowledge our origins of where we came from, and that we have wiring that has throughput from that time until now, and we're still doing the same shit. Why do people not want to acknowledge that? That's my question.
A couple of reasons. I think there are plenty of people that don't know. We're not a well-educated population anymore. I'm not the guy that says we're terribly educated. I think American schools are doing a good job. We have a problem with poverty and attendance, which affects that education. But the schools are wired to provide pretty good educations. But how many people, Randy, how many people do you know that have any sense of just the duration of the existence of Homo sapiens and our links to other hominids? I mean, even just a basic understanding that if you took the 200,000-ish years that we've been walking around and you converted that to a calendar year, you would not have the Enlightenment. You would, so we would have been, we were walking out of Africa like 2 days before New Year's Eve. And then, on New Year's Eve at about 5 p.m., there's the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. That was a great moment, right? 400 years ago. And then, industrialization. It's 11 p.m. And I'm just ballparking this to some degree, but really we don't get to tech until we're like 2 minutes before midnight. And then we're kind of like addressing violence in the last 2 blinks of our eye of that calendar year. So when you think of it that way and you try to explain that to people, I actually do have a time continuum that I show in one of my lectures to explain to people, hey, I'm up here. I know a little, but we are just in the last 2 blinks of the year. We got a lot more work to do. And you've got to understand that we are, our lowest common denominator is not very good. Our highest common denominators, to some degree, are happening today through our cognitive neuropsych research and cognitive behavioral therapy. But honestly, some of the best moments in human history have happened in previous eras. The Romans had some great times, and the Greeks had some great times, and the Chinese had incredibly beautiful times and aesthetic times and philosophical times. We're not coming up with much new in that area. If anything, we're kind of de-evolving that way. Yeah. I just don't think there are many people that understand that basic drive that you started with the fighting, fucking. I add feeding to that. So feeding, fighting, and fucking. And this kind of explains this, trend for violence that occurs more in the springtime. Because again, let's just go back to when before we had heat in our houses. You kind of hibernated in the winter, and then spring came along, and oh my gosh, all this energy to get out and do the 3 F's, right? And that's when the Crusades happened. They would mount up, and in the spring, off they went to the Holy Land. And most wars were put on hold in the winter, and they would fight like crazy in the spring. Again, the 3 F's. I think the answer to your question is people live. Many people get their information from a confident or confirmation bias sources on their phone that are fairly two-dimensional. And if it isn't a 1-minute read, they're not going to stick it out. And you can't get to bioevolution. You can't get to the kind of stuff you're looking at without spending some time in there, and cross-referencing and then looking up that author you talked about. I've got a few that I like to read that they don't talk as much about the bioevolution, but Sacha Baron Cohen, his cousin, is one of the leading psychiatrists in neuropsych stuff. And his name's Simon Baron Cohen. And he's got some great books, and Adrian Rain on the anatomy of violence. And in those books, they do talk about some of the, the basic, genetics and chemical, biological pieces to our behavior. And they don't rule out being enlightened and transcending that. By all means, that's where some of these great philosophical movements and therapeutic movements really do help people get above those kind of primal urge driving stimulus. But again, our kids our teenagers are still operating at pretty basic levels.
Somebody once said that our biological evolution is not a straitjacket, but it's still a player.
Yeah, big player. Mm-hmm.
And it's been remarkable to me, and somebody that's dealing with guns in the modern era is just that gap. Like, so you brought up that lack of education is the gap in understanding. Like, it's almost like, I always look at it like everybody thinks we just dropped out of the sky right when they were born.
Yeah.
Like, there's no consideration of the previous vectors even 100 years ago, let alone 300,000, 200,000, 100,000. And I have a hypothesis, but we won't go too far down the road. But it's not socially advantageous for middle income, white, 20-something female social justice warrior to buy a plane ticket and go to the Amazon and get impregnated by an Amazonian hunter-gatherer and bring that back home to their college. Like, that's not socially advantageous for them. They can be into diversity and equality all they want, but there's a firewall against them moving into the primitive realm completely, right? And so that's an interesting indicator, because I just think that if you take a picture of hunter-gatherers, from which we all come from, and we're all from Africa, and our genetics are from Africa, and you put it up on the wall, I think that conservatives generally will have an aversion to those beings that we used to be, because based on how those beings look.
Yeah.
And liberals will have an aversion to it based on how those beings behave.
Yeah.
But there's a firewall culturally to our origins, because the overall message that we've given is, if that's how you're going to be, we're going to fucking steamroll you. And that's it. We might let you live or whatever, but we're not fucking going back there and doing that. So one of my hypotheses is we're blocked away from people acknowledging it because we're terrified of doing it. Like, honestly.
Yeah. And cherry picking what we want to think about history. Very much cherry picking. So, and you just see it. You see it so much with, I'd say, people under 40 that are now kind of blaming, boomers for all the problems, and the boomers, sure. Boomers blamed, they didn't know it was the greatest generation or the one before it, silent, the one after. They were blaming, everybody does that, but it's a cherry pick. Boomers did this, boomers did that. We acquired a lot of money, blah, blah. But, there was a civil rights movement in the 60s.
Yes.
Boomers did some pretty awesome shit.
Yeah.
And some wealth management that they get to give to their kids. And a lot of boomers didn't inherit. Some did. But I'm not in defense of boomers. But at the same time, you see this cherry pick happening.
So, I mean, the short of all of that, the place that we just went there is that although it might not seem like it's advantageous to talk about evolutionary behavioral vectors, I think that for some of us who are capable of going there, I think it's irreplaceable. As long as we're doing the proximate view on top of that also, which, like a career like yours spent all that time, and we have the details of the now. But and some of the details of the past and some thoughts about the future, but we also have that deep understanding of, well, paleoanthropologist and archaeologist Dr. John Shea has said in one of his papers, and he named the paper, Homo sapien is as Homo sapien was. That's the name of the paper. There's no difference in many, many categories. So I think it's good that we be educated by that some of this shit is so in the hardwiring. And I think the way we get to it in a better fashion is to at least acknowledge
it. And then how do you harness it, and bridle it clearly. That's Adrian Rain's book. I think it's called Anatomy of Violence. I'm looking for it. He's The Anatomy of Violence. He's kind of a humorous, geeky scientist. Adrian Rain is probably one of the, I think, leading figures in the neurosciences. He's got longitudinal studies all over the planet that he's been doing for 40 years and on psychopathy and violence. But he talks about, these things that are quite factual, genetics and nutrition, and his is kind of the modern versions of Guns, Germs, and Steel too.
Jared Diamond.
And which is still a fabulous read, and holds up. But Adrian brings in the Philip K. Dick novel Minority Report, and he says, to a certain degree, we are not far, knowing what we know, we are not far from being able to make very valid predictions about the future of someone's behavior based upon their arousal on certain tests, some genetic structures, PET scans, the nutrition or poisoning by metallics that they might have had, head injuries. And we can do that as early as 14, even 12 years old. What do you do with that is his question. And that's why he brings in Minority Report. If you're familiar with the story, they see murder slightly before it happens, and then they arrest the guy for almost murdering someone. And that's the course of civilization within that story. And he brings that in kind of an eloquent way of saying, we are going to be faced with some of those decisions. Like we're going to know, to an appreciable degree, that someone is going to cause a lot of pain. How do you deal with that? How do you work with the parents? Does the state have some, I know this is scary shit, right? Does the state have some place in saying, okay, we're putting more observation in this kid's life? I don't have an answer to it. He only poses the question, but he does make it very clear that we are going to be able to figure that out. And he is operating on science. He is not a utopian, thinker. He's not trying to be politically correct in this book on any level. He's saying, these are the facts of the science. This is what we know. And this is where we're at right now. I think it's an excellent read. I highly recommend it.